What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Vast Podcast / Can I Comment?
Which one does this fall under?
I don't know yet. We'll see. We'll see. Probably Can I Comment? It's all the same. It's all the same. We've got.
You can't say that. You're going to dilute our brand.
Yeah, bro. We've got the one and only Filmore Bouldes.
The third.
What's up, man?
How you guys doing? How's LA?
It's I think it's still sunny outside.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
It's sunny.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
We thought we just felt an earthquake about a half hour ago.
I think that was just somebody with a sledgehammer next door.
Yeah. It was either a sledgehammer next door or an earthquake.
Or it could have been the bombs by my house going off. We felt the repercussions of that. I got evacuated from my home this morning because apparently a homeless guy who's been living under the bridge near my house for the last several years.
That you guys know.
Yeah, we bring him food every now and then.
He's like a friend.
The neighbors help take care of him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But apparently he was getting escorted into a home today. And on the way out, he told the police that he had bombs buried in the ground. So we all got evacuated. And the
I'm glad that they took that serious.
I'm glad they did too,
right?
Honestly. And so the bomb squad's there and they're going to be digging it up. So I'm going to come home.
How long are they evacuated for? Do you know?
They didn't say. They just said, come check it out later.
That's amazing.
Which, who knows? They got to go looking for the bombs.
Right.
They don't know where they are. Apparently they're buried in the ground. I hope they don't set them off when they're doing that.
Yeah. Gosh, can you imagine? That's crazy.
Living in LA.
Only in LA.
Living in LA.
What about you, man? How's New York?
New York is great. We had a slight scare, not a slight scare. We had a pretty legitimate scare like last week on the
train.
On the trains.
Yeah.
The guy, he's caught now, and I don't even know the full story of where he's from. I think he's maybe from Philly or based in Philly, but was here, and he's I think they found out he was a conspiracy theorist or whatever, and
Wow.
he felt the need to bust off some shots on the train, but luckily no one was hurt. But crazy story is, so we do our staff meetings at 9:30, so that happened around I think 8, a little between 8 and 8:30, or maybe a little 8:30 to 9, and there was a guy who takes that train every day that was coming into staff meeting, and he said for some reason this day he felt the need and the urge to take the bus.
Wow.
Really?
Literally has never taken the bus in his life. He took the bus to the office.
Wow.
And he gets to the office, shows me the news, and he's showing it me on his phone, and he's like shaking.
Oh my
so
gosh.
Sheesh.
shook up by the fact that he was supposed to be on that commute. So crazy.
That's crazy.
Holy
God
Spirit.
protection story.
Yeah.
Holy Spirit.
Yes.
So
That's like
for
that.
Anyone listening to this that
God
does
is
not
real.
believe in the divine intervention of Jesus Christ, it is real.
That's crazy. That's like that. Was it the Smith Wigglesworth story where he was I think he was in London, and he'd gotten on a train, and before the train left, the Holy Spirit said to him, "Get off the train."
Wow.
And he got off the train, and the train, like 5 minutes later, got derailed and killed everybody on the train.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's like
That is insane.
It's
I reckon when we get to heaven, there'll be so many God providence stories like that that we just had no idea that He protected us of.
Yeah,
Protected us from prayers He didn't answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right.
Anyway,
we're
I
gonna
digress.
We're gonna talk today about social media, amongst a bunch of other things. Fillmore, we knew we had to have you on to talk about this. You are a prolific user of the social media.
Prolific, great word.
I regularly ask you if the things that I have put on social media are appropriate or inappropriate, and you always tell me,
I can be your filter.
And you always tell me, "Yeah, bro, not good. Take that down." So.
Or maybe I'll say, maybe I would word it like that.
Yeah, exactly. So today we're going to talk about social media. There's this article. I'm the classic name mispronouncer. So what's his name again?
Jonathan Haidt.
Jonathan Haidt.
He wrote The Coddling of the American Mind.
You
read that book,
yes.
Right? That's one of your favorites.
I love that book.
I started to read it and it didn't really grab me.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know why.
it's really. I think all the stories that they tell, most people have already heard anyway.
Okay.
So they spend a lot of time telling stories,
but it's kind of in that same vein as like Douglas Murray, like Madness of Crowds, maybe some like Jordan Peterson-esque type like stuff.
Yeah, they're kind of part of their whole idea in that book is that we've essentially created a generation of weak people. Legitimately, because of how so like they talk about the like invention on college campuses of like
not to their fault. Like I think he's careful to like
not to the to
Gen Z or
Gen
Z
Alpha, exactly, but
because of the way we have set things up.
Exactly. Right. Yes, I'm not calling Gen Z.
Well, I guess he kind of is. But he's taking responsibility.
He just said it's not.
He said our generation is responsible.
Yeah, but the idea is like,
why though? Why?
I mean, he brings it all back. Yeah, he brings it all back to academia.
He's a psychologist, right?
He's a psychologist, and he's a professor at in the business school at NYU, and his whole Stern School of Business, and their whole thing is basically just like the minute college campuses became places where speech and things that were talked about, not necessarily censored, but the invention of like trigger warning and a kid saying, I can't read this book that my philosophy professor wants me to read because it triggers past trauma. And so like things like that. So now all of a sudden these students go to college, which is supposed to be the place of like free ideas and debate, is now the opposite of that.
Does he talk about safe spaces in that at all on college campuses?
Okay. I'm sure he does.
Yep.
And like even all the stories about lecturers coming, guest speakers coming into college campuses and people
protesting
that and getting them taken off campus. Like those are very real things that have happened.
And I think why people resonate with him or they're more open to listening to him is because he kind of comes from that elite world of academia. So he's sort of like critiquing his own,
right,
in many ways, so to speak. So I think people are pretty responsive.
And he's quite winsome in his writing as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So he comes out with this piece in the Atlantic which is just an amazing title for an article, Why the Past 10 Years of American Life Have Been Uniquely Stupid, which is just a brilliant headline. But basically the idea is, this thing, social media, the internet that has promised to unite us has kind of done the opposite. People are trying to figure out why, blame Mark Zuckerberg, blame Jack Dorsey, the algorithm, capitalism, whatever it is.
You got to throw in capitalism.
Capitalism.
Okay.
It's all,
make sure you throw in capitalism.
Everything is capitalism's
fault. But this is his explanation. And basically what he says is social media is making us unfit for democracy. And that basically, unless we change course, he thinks we stand to lose everything.
Yeah, he actually says that.
Yeah, he actually says that.
The collapse of society.
Yeah, the collapse of society. So we're going to kind of talk about that. He sort of uses the metaphor of the Tower of Babel. So we're going to kind of talk about that. We're going to talk about some of the social media stuff, but really, what should Christians think about all of this? How should we use social media? Should we? And are some of the solutions that he presents in this article solutions that we think will work?
Right.
Basically.
Yep.
So he kind of starts out by using this metaphor of Babel. And he says, what would it have been like to live in Babel in the days after its destruction? In the book of, he talks about the story in the book of Genesis, and he kind of goes through that story. And then he just says, the story of Babel is the best metaphor I have found for what happened to America in the 2010s. For the fractured country we now inhabit, something went terribly wrong. We're disoriented, unable to speak the same language or recognize the same truth, and we are cut off from one another and from the past. So where does he get this metaphor? And like, maybe you guys just talk about the Tower of Babel. What's that story?
I think I definitely get the point he's trying to make in the sense of the language. fractured the disunity and that we see and correlating that and paralleling that with Babel. I think the issue though with that parallel and comparison is I think he misses the big idea of why Babel was wrong in the first place. Is not that the reason that Babel was wrong was because, as we see God say, it was an affront to God. They were trying to make a tower unto themselves, and God saw because of that he had to come in and intervene. And I think the reason that's important is because even though what our brother is saying is great, and there's a lot of good context and a lot of great thoughts, I think it is important to understand that the primary issue here that we're dealing with when it comes to social media, the effects of it, aren't necessarily human problems. They are in the sense of, they are human problems. I'm sorry, they can't be solved by human means. So it seems as if what he's trying to communicate is if we were to just be more unified in how we communicate, if people who were running these social media platforms were thinking more, thinking less about what would get engagement, what would be more viral, then everything would be so sweet. But that just doesn't necessarily include the biggest issue in all of us, is that really all of us have this thing in us that, just like in the Tower of Babel, we seek to make a name for ourselves. We seek to build things unto ourselves, unto our glory, and that's a sin issue. And I think whether it's why am I saying this? It's important because whether it's social media or anything else, you cannot diagnose a issue that you can't provide a solution that needs a supernatural Jesus.
Yeah, he's not like adequately diagnosing the problem.
Yeah, he's not adequately diagnosing, but I get the parallel he's trying to make. I do see, I think obviously we can see the social media landscape and see there's polarization. We can see that churches have been divided. Definitely a valid point, but
if you were to take his metaphor all the way from a biblical perspective, it would have to be that God introduced social media, because God is the one that confused the language in the story of the Tower of Babel. And so maybe social media is part of God's judgment. Maybe that's caught up. Maybe that's the fourth trumpet judgment in the book of Revelation. Social media gets introduced into the human experience. But we know that at Pentecost, God undid the curse of Babel. But all that to say, I think we do agree that it's a fine metaphor to use. He's doing what Jordan Peterson does. He's doing even what some pastors are guilty of doing at times. They're reading the Bible more anthropologically than they are theologically. And I believe Jonathan Haidt is not a Christian, so of course he's not going to come at the scriptures from the same vantage point that we do. And for his purposes, I think it's a nice kind of jumping off point for his article, and to help him make the point that he's making, which is that we're living in a time of extremely, not just fractured communication, but a time when communication is able to reach millions and millions of people in a very short period of time, with very low accountability, with very high acidity and attack. And it's tearing us apart, Lisa.
Which is right.
which is dangerous. I agree with his sentiment and conclusion there that it is dangerous.
Yeah. It's inviting mob dynamics. In fact, that's one of the things he says is, when our public square is governed by mob dynamics, unrestrained by due process, we don't get justice and inclusion. We get a society that ignores context, proportionality, mercy, and truth.
I thought that was strong.
So is it like, I guess the question, he kind of, and at least the way that I read it, is it's sort of like the breakdown in these institutions, while at the same time the creation of this new institution, which is the internet, right? And these social media platforms, which is like the big argument in politics and in business right now, is, are these social media companies, the way that they are able to shape discourse, like, are they even really companies anymore? Are they public utilities? Right. So like the shaking of the institutions in our country, along with the creation of this new institution, has then caused humanity to act in this new way that they've never acted before. And I think my question is, like, as Christians, we're not like I mean, we're not shocked that people are acting this way. It's not these like, I mean, I guess my question, what I'm trying to get at is like, it's not the internet that created people to be this way. They were this way before. The internet has just like heightened it. Is that
it's exposed the problem. It's exposed the problem that's already existed, but it hasn't.
And he would say exposed, but also accelerated.
Yeah, accelerate, which I agree with. I think part of, because I've gone back and forth on this, because as you said, I'm prolific in my use of social media, which I concur and agree with wholeheartedly. But no, I love it. I think it's done a lot of good in my life. I found the church that I serve at now through social media. I've gotten jobs when I was a photographer because of social media. I've met people because of great friends. So, prior to maybe the last year or so, but actually prior to 2020, social media could do no wrong. And anyone that had any negative critique about it, or it's what it was doing to us and the fractured society and how it was, making us terrible, antisocial and all these different things, I always thought, oh, it's because you as an individual don't have self-control. But I think the thing that he says in the article is basically what we're doing is we're basically giving this tool or this weapon of social media to people who are, and he equates humanity or the users of social media to 4-year-olds. And obviously a 4-year-old doesn't know how to adequately use a weapon. They're only going to use it for harm. And I think as a Christian, we can agree with that sentiment, because I do think there is a immaturity in our humanity, immaturity in our, there's an emotional immaturity that we carry because of sin, because we don't have the wisdom of God. So if you take a society that is already void of God, taking God out the picture, God is out of our schools. He's, we don't really, atheism is rising. So if you take that out of the picture and then you combine that with this use of social media where anyone can say anything at any time, and there's going to be disaster and destruction. So I think I'm saying all that to say that I am now a bit more inclined to agree with the danger of social media and that it needs to be regulated, because if it's not regulated, I don't think humanity can properly engage or handle with it, because we're just too immature. We are immature. Our sin will get the best of us. And it happens in my personal life. I know that if I am not conscious and constantly inviting God into the wisdom of God into how I engage with social media, it gets the best of me. I am more insecure because of unhealthy engagement with social media than I've been before,
Same. I guess in a large way, it's very hard for me to talk about the subject without feeling like a massive hypocrite, because I use social media a lot. Like my least favorite moment of every single week, which just so happens to be Sunday morning. I don't know if this is on everybody's iPhone, but every Sunday morning, my iPhone tells me what my daily usage was. And it's always like 4 or 5 hours, man. I'm on my flipping phone every single day. I think it's daily. It's definitely not weekly. I mean, it would be way more than that. And it's always like literally 30 minutes before I start preaching. And it just totally hits me.
Just a reminder of how much time you've spent on social media that week.
Wasting my life. Well, it's not just social media. It's like total phone usage.
Right.
But a very large portion of that is
social media.
Specifically for me, Instagram. I don't use other.
It definitely, I think and I'm sure you probably got another question, but I think for me personally also, it tugs at the insecurity of humanity. And if you don't know, I think where we as Christians, I guess, have a leg up or edge up in the game is we know that insecurity is because there's an area of maybe the love of God that we're not receiving. We know, okay, we need to take this and direct it to God. Okay,
we have a flesh, we have a sin nature.
Yeah, we know that. So I need to take this to God because, no one added me during my preach. Oh, that's because I'm trying to get more praise from them than from God. So I know that that's the issue. I know how to diagnose it. But take that same sort of insecurity to people that don't know how to diagnose it, don't know why they're insecure. They're just going to continually try to use it and get from it, what
I guess that kind of launches into this is a little bit of a rabbit trail, but I feel like this is worth chasing. That kind of gets into the idea of can humanity adequately diagnose human problems apart from the belief in the biblical teaching of sin? And my view would be that no, we cannot adequately diagnose them. And I guess the point that I'm getting at there is that we can't ultimately prescribe holistic solutions. We can only kind of attack these things from certain aspects. Like we were having a conversation the other day about therapists and counselors and the amount of the level to which prescriptions are given out for antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication, things like that. That stuff is pretty much ubiquitous now. It's crazy how often it's prescribed and taken. And that has to connect to the idea that we're ultimately ignoring the base problem. In that regard, I think he's talking specifically about social media. I think he's quite right in saying this is not going to get any better. Now, his reasons for believing that are different than mine.
Exactly, but I agree with his conclusion.
Yeah, but I think his conclusion is right.
What do you guys think? Trying to figure out which direction to go, because there's definitely the kind of usage of social media and all that kind of stuff.
And then there's the larger question of the role of Christianity in the world to help the world see how it actually can get better.
Yeah, well, I guess that's my thing, right? I feel like I am one of two extremes on social media. So when we had our baby, when my wife had our baby, the first 3 months were really difficult. He was colic. He would cry 4 or 5 hours a day. So my wife was at home with him, and for the first few months, she was just on social media.
What do they call it? Death scrolling?
Yeah, just all of it. And she just said it was progressively making her more anxious. And so she just decided okay, I'm done. Completely done. Deleted it from her phone, has not been on. And if you ask her today, she's I am infinitely more happy. I am infinitely more focused. I'm infinitely more present. And so I hear that and I'm man, that sounds like it would be so good for my soul.
I think it would be good for your soul.
But then
Can I just say as a friend right now that I think you should get off social media?
I also do you did that?
It's a little shoulder rub.
But okay, yes. However, but then on the opposite extreme.
But then who would respond to all of the snarky comments we get on our fast?
Exactly. No, but then on the other thing, I'm I don't know. The Apostle Paul wouldn't have just said I'm not going to do that because it's hard.
Right.
So I sort of
you think Paul would have been on social media?
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
I think so.
Are you reading that into? Are you reading that into?
I have no scriptural basis for that whatsoever.
Yeah, what is your how are you?
I just think
Paul sailed on ships across the Mediterranean Sea,
so we got to use
and therefore he would have used today's technology.
I guess my thing
is that being all things to all people, I guess.
No, I guess my thing is
Paul wrote on parchment paper.
Okay, yeah. Now I'm so glad we're going down this train.
He quoted a secular artist once.
Yeah, exactly. No, but I will say this: I do see this trend now, and I totally get it, because I do get that pastors are now in this mode where they're they feel forced to say something about everything and use social media, and there's this whole concept of discipling and pastoring via social media. And so you see all these hot takes of I think pastors just need to disengage from that. And nobody wants to hear what their pastor's topic is on X, Y, or Z. And while I get the sentiment and I understand that, and I don't necessarily disagree, the truth is that the people in our churches are spending so much more time on social media than they are listening to our sermons. And I just think if we're not on there participating, then there's this massive void left. And so I feel I'm literally caught in between those two things.
No, I actually think that's a great perspective. And obviously I am on social media.
Yeah.
So I'm totally messing with you. And
I'm not pastoring or discipling people on social media.
My question though, back to that, is how do we actually measure the effectiveness of our pastoring, discipling on social media? That's what, because I always hear that argument, which I don't necessarily disagree with, but I also don't know how to measure the effectiveness of my engagement, me being present on social media.
Yeah. I don't use it as a pastoring or discipling tool at all. Like I don't even attempt that.
Right.
I'm the guy that thinks like I will think of something pithy and write it down, and then by the time I go to post it, I'm like, this is stupid. I'm dumb. I'm a moron. What the hell do I know?
Anytime I ever do it, I just realize it's littered with typos. So I just
and it's not discipleship anyway. That's not really what discipleship is, and that's the real issue. Is that we think that's discipleship.
But I should have said that, but I was trying to be diplomatic.
Yeah. No, sorry. You're good.
I just don't know if it works, Like, I think surely there's better ways, or maybe there's the wrong word, but yeah, there's more intentional ways that we can help form and shape people's thinking about social media while not also being on social media, I don't have to be on social media all the time and know what Elon Musk or Trump or everyone's doing to be able to speak relevant in the culture all the time. And that's the lie I think we believe. And I just don't know. I think I thought so, but then I just got exhausted after 2020. And now I just have chosen to only speak out unless I really, 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 really felt a conviction from the Holy Spirit to do so. If not,
otherwise,
or I'm like angry or something. But
so that brings up a good question is, how much should we, like, I'm one of those people. It's like, I want to know everything. My curiosity is like my probably an asset, but it's also the biggest rabbit trail. Is like, I get curious about anything, and there goes the next 5 hours of my day. And that's with anything. But like, as pastors and Christians, like, we can't completely disengage, but how important is it for us to like know what's happening? Or is it just like, maybe it's not as important as we think it is? I don't know. Or is it just purely gifting and personality, and some people are more into it than others, and that's fine?
I think what I would say a lot of times is pastors are more aware of what's going on in the world than they are what's going on in their church.
That's good.
And so there are issues that you need to speak into, specifically because they are affecting the congregation that you shepherd. Speaking into them is not equal to posting about it on social media. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't post about certain things. Yeah. I mean, so I would say for me, there are certain accounts that I follow and the reason I follow them, not strictly, but one of the big reasons I follow them is because I find their thought helpful. And so in that sense, they are, I guess, discipling me. They're helping me to understand how to think. And so there is that aspect to it. I think what Jonathan Haidt is on about in this, and I have a little bit of an advantage in this conversation because I listened to a podcast last night of him talking to some other guy, and he started talking about this. In fact, I think the podcast was on this article. But he's talking about how the goal that Mark Zuckerberg set out to do with Facebook was like, what could be wrong with connecting more people? Like that in and of itself sounds like a good idea, right? And what he then talks about it is that, sure, that's a good goal, but that's not what we've done. By adding things like retweet, share, like those buttons, it makes the connection performative. So that you're doing it for accolades and attention, and you're doing it to go viral, which kind of brings out the worst in us because now we're trying to say the most bombastic things, or
and you're rewarded for it.
And you're rewarded for it, right?
Yeah, I mean, why not? Like, if that is the goal, to be successful, get peak engagement, why wouldn't I be the worst version of myself on social media? If that's my goal, like Tekashi 6ix9ine or Trump or whoever it is, like, if you these people, they figured it out. Like the whole troll culture, like Tekashi 6ix9ine's whole goal before he drops a song, for anyone that doesn't know, he's a rapper. from Bushwick, was a bodega guy and bodega clerk, and then start rapping SoundCloud. But his
Wait,
whole
is he
goal,
the one? Is he the one that was on the Breakfast Club with him and Brian Houston?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's him. And Brian Houston prayed, Father, bless him, Father. That Aussie accent. But anyway, like his whole goal before every time he drops a single is controversy.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like he's purposely trying to troll, and he will go to the highest. He would actually put his own life in danger, quite literally. Start beef with real gangs and real people just so that he can get more attention, so that he can get more engagement. Like he is the epitome of the worst of the human condition and what social media brings out, and what So I think it's ridiculous.
Well,
it's making us stupider.
It's making us
stupider.
That is his point, right?
Right.
It's making us dumber.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's so true. I'm thinking like Kanye West maybe would be similar, right? And that like every time a new album is coming out or his documentary comes out a couple of months ago, and it's like now all of a sudden he's acting crazy on social media again.
Kanye can do no wrong in my eyes, but keep going.
But there goes back to that thing where it's like Kanye has a crazy couple of weeks on social media and everyone's like, is this marketing? Is this a troll? Is this real? Is this PR? Or is he losing his mind? So we're now literally living in a world where, the attention, or even like the Will Smith slap at the Oscars, I thought it was staged for the whole first week. Because I was like, surely they just did this to drum up views. It's
wow, that's good.
Which is kind of like what he talks about in this article about disinformation, right? And just how like disinformation is not just an election, around an election. It's about like beefs online. It's about all kinds of stuff. So we literally don't know what to believe. And if you don't know what to believe and what's true or not,
that was his point about, a lack of trust in institutions, a lack of trust in government, which is, if you don't know what to believe, then obviously you lose your trust in these institutions that are there to essentially provide stability and structure and direction to society.
One thing that, and I don't know how much any of us can speak on this because I'm not an artificial intelligence expert, not even a artificial intelligence novice. But that part of the article where they're talking about like what AI can currently do online and what it's like very close to being able to do, and the fact that it can like write a series of articles with a perspective and a voice and a tone.
And be pretty compelling.
And have no grammatical errors. Like I can't even do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's crazy.
And that's the version we're in now, and we're not very far off from like the next version of that, which is even like more intense uses of like robots doing real human things online.
I think the problem that we face as Christians is this. Because the most extreme sides of any viewpoint are what get the most attention, and that's what he goes into that here, right? So you have on the right, you have like far right and all of the conspiracy theories and all the blah blah blah, and if you like you abandon Trump and you're a traitor to the country and yada yada, and then you have the far left, the like progressive activists, everybody's a racist, everybody's a transphobe, all of that. And so you have these two extremes of these sides that are using it the most and that use it with the most amount of vitriol. And what happens is, because that's the stuff that gets retweeted, that's the stuff that goes viral, that's the stuff that gets shared, is when normal people read that stuff, it's very hard to disassociate the more moderate right-wing person or the more moderate left-wing version of that person, or just more moderate, left-wing or right-wing.
There's no such thing as a moderate left-wing person.
It's very hard to disassociate the everyday moderate person who some of their views it's hard to disassociate them with the extreme representation that's getting retweeted like 30 million times or whatever. Like that's probably an exaggeration.
And they're getting retweeted as the
norm.
Spokesperson.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
And so it becomes the category. And so what happens is we come into our actual real life. We come into our community. We come into our Sunday morning gathering. We go into our group, our dinner party, and it starts fracturing our relationships actually because we're living in this fake universe of Twitter and Instagram and Facebook.
Well, even now on Twitter, if I log on to Twitter, it will show me a tweet that Filmore has just liked.
Right.
So he hasn't even retweeted it. He hasn't even endorsed it. He's just said, "Oh, I like this."
Right.
Which means that
which he could have done for any number of reasons.
Yeah. And so to think that I can't then see Filmore in real life and have that in the back of my head forming the way that I view him and what I think about him that's completely impossible.
And it 100% happens, And I think, honestly, I do think, without sounding too cheesy, it's all the more important to just think more deeply about Jesus in his life and how he lived. Because I was just thinking about it the other day. I was like, I told myself, don't forget to think deep about Jesus today. Just think about how he lived. Like even, because if I'm Jesus after the resurrection, the first person I'm going to is Pontius Pilate. I'm not going to Mary. I'm going to the ones who were the most offensive to me, and I'm going to tell them about themselves, or get revenge, or be divisive, but I think the way in which Jesus handled the extremes, the way in which Jesus lived, showed grace and compassion to those that were hurting, but also stood for truth to those who were in error. But the way in which he did it, it was not. Yes, it was divisive when it needed to be, but it wasn't spiteful. I think it's very there's a lot of wisdom, and I think if I can just because I read an article once that said Jesus was winsomely offensive, and I liked that description. I don't know if it was John Tyson or someone, that truth offends for the sake of truth, but he wasn't trying to be offensive for the sake of being offensive. He was being truthful. And I think, but he was also gracious. If you think about the grace that he showed to the disciples after he had already told them time and time again what he was going to do, and they didn't believe him and all the things. It's very, very convicting and challenging with how I deal with people on social media who maybe, are on the other side or whatever. So I guess that's my thought is, how do we bring the life of Jesus into our engagement with social media and in our social media interactions?
Which I would like to think the majority of Christians do, but I genuinely don't know. We may not, I'm not sure.
Yeah. I guess to get really practical before we kind of move on to some of the changes that he sort of brings to the table in this article to determine what we think about those. How do you think you would pastorally counsel someone in social media usage? Like knowing all that we know, knowing the effects of it, knowing the studies that have come out that are like Instagram literally knows that it makes it's like more likely for a teenage girl under the age of 16 to develop an eating disorder after spending time on Instagram. And they still how do we counsel people to how they use it?
I would very much advise parents to, even though I don't have a kid, but just being a youth pastor experience, but then also knowing people that, work with Instagram, or also, work in different. I would advise parents to really be intentional about monitoring the use of their teens' social media use. I think that's a very wise thing to do, because it's just it's crazy, the amount of anxiety and comparison and the negative self-talk and just worthless feelings of identity that's happening because of TikTok and the algorithms and all. It's just really, really sad. So I think I would be aware. I wouldn't be ignorant and just say, "Oh, I trust them to do what they want to do."
Yeah,
No,
I
I would.
agree. I have an 8-year-old son, and he is a long way off from having a smartphone and a long way off from social media. And it'll be a long time before he even fully understands what those things are. If I can affect that. Because I just wholeheartedly agree. When it comes to counseling other people, I would have to first counsel myself. Again, I feel like such a hypocrite even talking about this. But I see it in myself, like, and I know that when I intentionally stay away from social for a day, I'm gonna have a better day. That's any barometer.
One of the things I thought was interesting, and this is like, it's funny you say that, because you sort of like, you say that, and both of you guys use social media, and I'm sure there's this pressure to be present on there, right? But even like, a lot of these people who have a large platform on social media, whether they're a leader in a business, whether they're a church leader or whatever, oftentimes they're not even the ones using their own social media account.
Right.
Like
That's true.
they have somebody else doing it for them so that they can engage and get on it from time to time. But
well, that's why I found this podcast honestly to be so helpful, is all the things I used to want to post about. Now I just like save it for a podcast episode. I'd rather talk it out with you or, or somebody else than and not, obviously not everyone is going to have that outlet, but maybe that is a good example of just finding other outlets to talk about the things that you would normally take to social media.
And I think this is an example to affirm that is I use the photo sharing app Visco way more now for photos than I do Instagram, because there's no like button on Visco, and the owners of Visco have purposely did that, and the users of the percentage of users, the highest percentage of users on the Visco app are actually teenage girls. Because it's a confirmed fact. It's because there's no pressure. They can post selfies of themselves or whatever without the pressure of likes. So that affirms, what we're talking about, and the danger of the comparison game. But for me as a photographer, I just got tired of looking at it and seeing, oh, this photo is killer, but it's got 50 likes and something. I rather just put it out there and be able to see it and not have it be judged by some sort of algorithmic process. Yeah.
So he talks about like,
and I guess it kind of goes to the social media reform stuff, right?
Yeah, and he like kind of presents these few different, changes that are needed. Part of that is one of those is like prepare the next generation, where kind of like you were talking about with your son, even just like how they're using it. He goes into actually a really cool part about what do they call it? Unsupervised play.
Yeah, I really liked that.
And
that stuff is so confronting to me, because like we live in LA, and like to the point of like, oh, there might be a bomb going off like down the street from my house. How am I supposed to just send my kid?
Yeah, right. I know.
down the street to the park, because beyond that little corner, there is a park there.
Yeah,
I'm not sending him there without.
Yeah, well, I was reading it. I was just like thinking about my own childhood of like there was no partially unsupervised play. It was just unsupervised
completely
play
all
the time, and how that's like actually better for kids and helps them develop and all that kind of stuff. So that's one of them where he essentially just says like, we need to be more intentional parents. We need to, help them figure out how to exist in the world outside of social media. And then he talks about like hardened democratic institutions, which none of us are policy experts. So part of what he's talking about there is just to kind of look at reforming some of the different election processes, and so that, whether it be a Supreme Court justice or a senator or congressman is not rewarded for being divisive, which now we live in a world where they're rewarded by being divisive, essentially by, but then the big thing is like, reforming social media. So
that I really liked.
Some
of his ideas were great.
Yeah. Talk about, I'm trying to remember what they were specifically, but.
I'd have to find them, but it was basically because the whole issue there, right, is when people start talking about reforming social media, the outcry is, oh, free speech, free speech, free speech. That's, if you try to tamper with it, you're going to get into censorship.
Even though a lot of the people doing stuff online are trolls.
Well, but
and they're,
the whole point is like, there's ways to reform social media without censoring what people are saying. I mean, you could reform social media by just taking away the retweet button. Or like they said, here was one that he suggested, like after something gets retweeted or shared on Facebook, like a handful of times, you can put in a feature so that if someone wants to keep retweeting it, they have to like instead like copy and paste it and put it in their own.
Yeah, shared twice. The third person in the chain must take the time to copy and paste the content into a new post.
Basically slow down the virality of something so that things have time to be checked. And that it forces people to think about what they're doing rather than just like literally one click. I can send this idea that was probably the result of a Russian
bot anyway,
like getting planted on the internet.
And I don't know how this would work, but if there was somehow ways to expose us to alternate viewpoints that were not extreme, reasonable, regularly, because we only have a caricature of the other side. We rarely have like you were saying, Jake, we rarely have a adequate viewpoint of what the other side believes, because most of what is being propagated or put up as the spokesperson for the left or the right are the extremists. So if there was a way in which the moderates of our differing beliefs if we were able to be exposed to that more often in the algorithm, even though that's not as sexy, I think it would create way more civil discussion, way more diplomacy, and ultimately be more helpful.
Well, and I know what part of what Elon Musk wants to do if he does gain control of Twitter is make the algorithm public so that any developer can go on, they can see what is powering the algorithm so that it's not some sort of like secret thing in some back room somewhere.
That's cool.
So that's one of his big things.
What a dangerous idea. What a dangerous man.
Dangerous. He's unsafe.
He's unsafe.
He's violent.
Elon Musk is an unsafe space.
He is an unsafe space unto himself. But like, okay, but if we've determined as Christians that like, sure, social media makes the problem worse, but it's not the problem, does that mean that like any of these reforms are going to ultimately fix the problem? And I know that we are Christians and we're to participate in what's happening in society, and we each have our own individual vocations and giftings and callings that lead us into all different types of industries to reform and fix and all that kind of stuff. But we're lying to ourselves if we think that any of these is going to be the ultimate answer.
No, and I don't think we do. I do think he has a point, though, in the sense that this stuff is definitely sped up the tearing apart of
the toxicity
of who we are.
The toxicity of it. Yeah.
It's not going to solve the problem reforming this at a heart.
But I do think even in that case, I do think there is wisdom in regulation, and I think same argument I think Martin Luther King made when he said something about, I can't maybe change your heart, but I can prevent them from allowing you to basically treat me harmfully by law. I can regulate you actually acting on that, which I thought was really, really wise, like laws can regulate human beings. That's the whole purpose of the law, actually, is to regulate and put boundaries on our sinfulness. And he talked about how the framers understood the frailty. He talked about that in the article. Understood
James Madison.
Yeah, James Madison. They understood our human condition, and so I think
how likely we would be to tear our republic apart.
Exactly, and I
think the proper checks and balances.
Exactly, and people need to be a bit more sober-minded about that and think and understand that. But that goes back to our further point. If we don't believe that, because if we believe that humans are inherently good, which most people probably that are working at these social media companies believe, maybe if we just tried harder and be better, then we can figure it out. No, that's actually not right. If we understood, no, we are sinful, we're flawed. What did James say? I was reading it this morning. why are there fights and quarrels among you? Is it not because the war that wages within you? There's a war that's waging within us that's causing all of this. But if we understood that, we'd be more inclined to regulate, to keep from destroying and further degrading society. So that's what I.
Yeah, it really does make me. This is my eternal struggle: is to what extent should we seek the influence of Christianity upon the world? I can't get away from that question, and I haven't been able to get away from it for the last 3 years almost.
What's the tension for you? How are you processing it?
To me, it's an issue of I'm not a triumphalist in the sense that I don't think that Christianity is going to triumph over all the systems of the world before Christ returns. So I'm not post-millennial in my view.
Is that like, who believes that? Like, is that like Bill Johnson? Is that Bethel? Some of that stuff?
I don't know what Bill's eschatology is.
I know they're being accused of that thinking, so I didn't know.
Are they? Yeah.
Yeah.
Doug Wilson
is post-millennial. But you can have that. You can have that bent in you, irrespective of whether or not you've even thought about the different eschatological positions in Scripture. You can just have that bent that is the point, right? That's what we're supposed to be doing. And I'm constantly torn about that because I believe in the Great Commission is what I believe in. And I think in connection to the Great Commission is the transformation of the world. And we can't talk about problems like these, whether it's bringing reform to social media or introducing laws through regulation, whatever it is. It always comes back to us as Christians as going, well, there needs to be Christian influence upon that. Right? Like that is the essence of what we're saying. And that's not something that a secular world is just going to like hop on board with, because they're going to look at the Christian ethic in many ways and call it outdated or, even
oppressive.
We posted a video to Vast of Alicia Childers talking about original sin. And someone commented on there, colonizers gonna colonize.
What does that even mean? Did colonizers invent original sin or something?
No, I think that they're just connecting like more reformed theology to whiteness and
of course,
like Western thought and all that kind of stuff. But that's a good example, right? Like ultimately, if we believe that we have a sin nature as humans, then Christianity is going to have to play a role in helping structure society. But that's when I just kind of go like, I don't know if that's going to happen.
Well, so, I mean, it's interesting you asked that question. I saw the other day, there was a church who was a church that will not be named. There was a church that was holding training courses at their church on how to run and get elected to local school boards, city, different kind of stuff. And there was this whole thread of people out.
Is this church in California?
It's in the Texas of California, the southernmost part of California. No, but, and on one hand, I'm sort of like, yeah, but what's so wrong with that?
Right.
Yeah. Right?
So like people were getting outraged about it?
Huh?
People were getting outraged.
Yeah. People were like, look, this is even more evidence that they're trying to like take over our school board and take over our city government and take over. And I think you use the term takeover and it sounds really intense, but I kind of find myself going like, I don't know, there are some amazing people in our church that would be great on the local city council and on the local school board. And so
I think where I net out is that this is kind of where I'm at now. Is that I think Christians should pursue it in every single aspect, in every single vertical that makes up our society, and be prepared for pushback and be prepared to fight like a Christian, which I mean to say is different than
which is maybe that would you say winsomely offensive?
Yeah, winsomely offensive.
Yeah.
Like, be prepared for that kind of life. because my personality wouldn't allow me to just be like, throw my hands up and be like, all right. I mean, the whole reason we do this podcast is because we think that there should be Christian thought influencing the way,
we
the
think about
works.
things.
Yeah.
No, it's good. I mean, I'd love to be on my kid's school board, I'd advocate for that. And I think that's a great thought, like I'd advise every parent to try to do that. Why not? Because we're fooling ourselves if we don't think that the people on these boards are influencing the minds of the children, and the minds of the children are being influenced, and they're shaping culture. Gen Z is shaping culture right now, just a fact. Fads, trends, language, values. So we should think about it. But it is a tension. I think it's the now and not yet, I guess, right? Like, to your point, I think that the now and not yet theology should define how we engage. To your point, like we pursue until, and then we just trust God with the rest. But I think we should
reasonable expectation about
reasonable expectation. Yeah, it's just like healing. Like I'm going to believe God that everyone I pray for will be healed, but I'm gonna have a reasonable expectation that might not happen until we get to heaven or we get to glory. So.
So I guess lastly, he kind of ends this article in a pretty bleak tone that is just essentially like, he might as well be saying it's not going to get better, it's going to get worse, so prepare yourself. How do you guys feel about that conclusion? And by the way, he's not the only person that's made this. I mean, you can't watch or see anything without everybody talking about this is where we're at, it's only going to get worse, what do you guys think about that? And then how does, I guess for lack of a more cliche question, like how does someone still have hope in following Jesus and living at peace and all of that if it's not going to get better and only get worse?
Well, I guess on the whole, I disagree. I think it will get better because we always have the new creation to look forward to. so it's at least going to get better then. But also, it seems to me when you look at history as a whole, and specifically in the last 2,000 years, we go through cycles, and things get really dark, and then they are less dark. And I think the influence of Christianity upon the world has a lot to do with that. And so we can seek for positive influence and for change. I think the worst thing Christians can do, and I would hate for anyone to misunderstand me as saying this, I think the worst thing Christians can do is disengage and just kind of leave it to the world to figure out. I think we've made that mistake in the past, especially in the realms of kind of being like anti-intellectual and not engaging in important conversations. And so I think Christians need to engage. And again, Jonathan Haidt's not factoring God into this equation. He's not factoring the sovereignty of the Lord Jesus. So who knows what God's going to do, and who knows how he's going to raise up his church in this hour.
Yeah. I think, I'm one that always will hope and expect and believe and pray that God can bring a revival. I think that's the whole purpose of prayer, right? I'm not praying for things to stay the same. I'm praying that God can do anything, and I'm hoping that, and I'm trusting that if he did it once before in the scriptures, or in past revivals or in history, he's the same God that can do it. So I think personally, how I personally do it when I do maybe read articles like this or see doom and gloom, I do actually practically have to listen to songs to get my faith up, or read stories in the scripture that get my faith up. Believe God. But in the middle of it too, I also think, and this may be contradictory to what I just said, but I do think because we have, for the most part, been super comfortable in our faith as believers in the West, sometimes we have unrealistic expectations of how well we will be received or how well society and culture will be. Like I think when I think about even the altar calls in the New Testament, like they probably were like not happy. You know what I mean? Like, hey, come give your life to, like at the book of Hebrews, right? Like, come give your life to Jesus. You may get your property confiscated. You know, you may be, you know, like it just, there was, but the writer of Hebrews essentially coaching them, hey, have faith, don't shrink back, don't be discouraged. So I think the posture of the church in the midst of calamity or whatever is going on, it should be one of confidence, faith, trust in God. Ultimately, our hope is in God. Ultimately, our hope is in God can do anything. But at the same time, like, life has been pretty good for us in America, you know, as far as like how we engage with our faith. And I think that I probably may get canceled for that. I don't know, because people would say, oh, you know, what about the minorities or whatever? But I think for the most part, like generally speaking, it's been very, very easily accepted to be. Your faith has been accepted up until recently, maybe the last.
Ideologically speaking, regardless
speaking,
of your material experience.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. So I think, but to your point though about that, that it's not necessarily hitting your question on the nose, but what I'm saying is, like, Christians just need to toughen up, is what I'm saying. So if it does get bleak, like, welcome to church history, you know, like there's, you know, this is what we do. We've been martyred for our faith. You know, we're bold. We're confident. We're not scared of the world, you know? And I think it just hasn't been the case. You know, we haven't had to really dig deep like that. So no matter where it goes, no matter how dark it gets, I look at it personally. Maybe it's also because it's my personality and I'm competitive, but I'm like, bring it on, you know, like, let's do it. Jesus, you know, you're gonna protect my family. You're gonna lead my family. You're gonna lead our church. Yes, some people may be deceived. Yes, they may be manipulated. Yes, there's going to be, particularly with a lot of this AI, I think manipulation and deception is going to be at an all-time high. But at the same time, I'm trusting that you got out of the grave. Jesus, you're going to lead us. You're not surprised. And I'm going to go for it. And then whatever happens, but I'm not going to be scared or, you know, so I think that's how I process it personally.
Awesome. Really good. Filmore, thank you, man. Thanks for taking the time to.
Always a pleasure. Can't wait to come to LA and hang with.
Yeah, man.
Love you, sir. You're the man.
Love you, dude.
You guys are the best. Love you guys.